What would you do if the man who promised to welcome you into his family publicly humiliated you, only to discover you hold the power to shatter his world? Sit tight, because this story isn't just about betrayal at a dinner table. It's about the night masks fell, secrets cracked wide open, and revenge tasted sweeter than any dessert served that evening. The Whitmore family thought they knew exactly who I was, a nobody who didn't deserve their precious son. They had no idea they were dining with someone holding 82 million reasons to prove them wrong. My name is Elena Brooks, and at 38, I've learned that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. That night at the Whitmore estate in Charleston, I was that person. The dining room gleamed with old Southern money crystal chandeliers casting rainbow fragments across mahogany walls, silverware that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors judging us from gilded frames. The air smelled of roasted duck and privilege, with an undertone of expensive perfume that made my throat tight. I smoothed my simple black dress, a deliberate choice from Target, not because I couldn't afford better, but because I wanted to see who they really were. Nathan squeezed my hand under the table, his Harvard class ring cold against my fingers. My fiancé, the golden boy of the Whitmore dynasty, still had no idea who he was really marrying. More wine. Dear Victoria Whitmore, my future mother-in-law, offered with a smile that never reached her eyes. Her diamonds caught the light as she gestured to the servant. Yes, they actually had servants hovering near the wall. "Thank you," I replied, watching the burgundy liquid fill my glass. Everything here was a performance, and I'd been assigned the role of grateful outsider. Gerald Whitmore dominated the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his navy blazer bearing the crest of some exclusive club I'd never heard of. He'd barely acknowledged me since I arrived, speaking around me rather than to me, as if I were furniture that had unfortunately learned to speak. The conversation flowed around real estate ventures, yacht club gossip, and investment portfolios, all designed to remind me of my place. I contributed little, observing instead. That's what I did at Harbor Point Capital too: observe, analyze, wait for the perfect moment to strike. Then it happened. Gerald stood, raising his glass with the authority of a man who'd never been challenged. The room fell silent. Even the servants froze. "A toast," he began, his voice carrying that particular Charleston drawl that turned words into weapons. "To family, to tradition, to maintaining certain standards." His eyes found mine, cold and dismissive. "Nathan, my boy," he continued, swirling his wine. "You know, when I was your age, I understood the importance of choosing the right partner, someone who could enhance our position, open doors, not—" He paused, his gaze sliding over me like I was something he'd scrape off his shoe, not someone we'd have to constantly explain or apologize for. The room crystallized into perfect, horrible silence. Victoria's lipsticked mouth formed a small O of fake surprise. Nathan's sister, Margaret, actually smirked behind her napkin. And Nathan, my Nathan, said nothing, did nothing. "After all," Gerald continued, warming to his theme, "the Whitmore name has meant something in Charleston for 5 generations. We can't have it diluted by someone who thinks a community college degree and a secretary's salary is an accomplishment. I wasn't a secretary. I was a senior analyst at one of the most exclusive private equity firms on the East Coast. But I'd let them believe what they wanted." "Dad," Nathan finally started, but Gerald waved him off. "I'm simply saying what everyone's thinking. Ms. Brooks seems pleasant enough, but pleasant doesn't build legacies. Pleasant doesn't secure futures. And frankly," he looked directly at me now, "you could do so much better. Son, the Mitchell girl is still single. Now there's breeding. There's potential." The ice in my water glass cracked. I'd been gripping it too hard. Around the table, eyes darted between Gerald and me, waiting to see if I'd cry, flee, or beg for acceptance. Instead, I smiled. Not my real smile that would come later. This was the smile I'd perfected in boardrooms when men explained my own analyses to me. The smile that said I heard every word, filed it away, and would remember it when the time came. How fascinating, I said softly, setting down my glass with deliberate calm. Please, Mr. Whitmore, don't let me interrupt. You were saying something about standards. Gerald's eyes narrowed slightly, perhaps sensing something predatory beneath my composure. But his arrogance won, as I knew it would. Simply that some people are born to certain positions, Ms. Brooks, and others. Well, they should be grateful for whatever crumbs they're offered. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his words. Inside, a cold fire had ignited. They thought they knew who I was. They thought they held all the cards. They had no idea that I'd already bought the entire deck. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and clinking silverware. I played my part perfectly, the intimidated outsider, the woman who knew she didn't belong. I even let my hand shake slightly when I reached for the salt, saw Victoria's satisfied nod at this sign of weakness. If only they knew that back in my downtown Charleston apartment, behind a false panel in my walk-in closet, sat a safe containing documentation of investment accounts worth $82 million. If only they knew that their little secretary had been playing a much longer, much more dangerous game than they could imagine. But they would know. Soon enough. The drive back to my apartment was silent. Nathan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel of his Mercedes, his jaw clenched in that way that meant he was processing. I stared out at the Charleston streets, watching the grand historic homes give way to the sleek modern buildings of downtown. Elena, I'm sorry, he finally said as we pulled into my building's garage. My father. He doesn't mean it. He's just protective of the family legacy. I almost laughed. Protective. As if I were some threat to their crumbling empire. If only he knew I could buy and sell his father's legacy 3 times over. It's fine, I said, the lie smooth as silk. I understand. Nathan walked me to my door, kissed me goodnight with promises to talk to his father, to make things right. I watched him leave, then stood in my living room, looking out at the harbor lights reflected on the water. The apartment was modest by Whitmore standards, 2 bedrooms. Simple furniture, nothing that screamed wealth. Another deliberate choice. I poured myself a glass of wine, a $60 bottle, not the $1,000 vintages the Whitmores served, and walked to my home office. Behind a reproduction Monet that I'd bought at a street fair hung my safe. The combination was my mother's birthday. The one person who'd believed in me when everyone else saw just another middle-class girl from Ohio with big dreams. Inside lay the truth account statements, investment portfolios, property deeds to buildings the Whitmores passed every day without knowing I owned them. $82 million, accumulated over 15 years of strategic investments, calculated risks, and patient waiting. The irony was delicious. While Gerald Whitmore sneered at my community college degree, I'd actually graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, paid for with scholarships and 3 jobs. While Victoria looked down at my Target dress, I had a closet full of designer clothes in a storage unit, waiting for the day I decided to stop pretending. But pretending had become an art form, a shield, a weapon. I'd learned early that money made people crazy. My first windfall came from a biotech investment $50,000 turned into $2 million in 18 months. I watched how people changed when they found out, how relationships became transactions, how love became calculation. So I created Elena Brooks, the modest financial analyst who drove a Honda, shopped sales, and lived quietly. The Whitmores had done their background check. Of course, they'd found exactly what I wanted them to find middle-class parents true. State school education partially true. I'd taken summer classes there, a decent but unremarkable job if you didn't dig too deep into what Harbor Point Capital actually was. They never thought to look for the shell companies, the anonymous LLCs, the trust funds in the Caymans. Why would they? I was just the secretary dating above her station. I pulled out my laptop and opened an encrypted folder labeled Whitmore. For 6 months, I'd been researching them, initially just curious about Nathan's family. What I found was a house of cards built on ego and debt. Gerald's development company was leveraged to the hilt. 3 failed projects in 2 years, covered up with creative accounting and new loans. The yacht was leased. The country club membership was 2 months behind. Even the estate, that monument to old Southern money, had been refinanced 3 times. They were drowning, and their plan was simple. Nathan would marry money. Real money. The Mitchell girl Gerald mentioned had a trust fund worth $40 million. They'd been courting that alliance for years. Then I came along and ruined everything with something as inconvenient as love, because I did love Nathan, despite his weakness tonight. He was brilliant, kind when his family wasn't watching, passionate about architecture in a way that lit up his whole face. He didn't care about the money. He'd have been happy designing sustainable housing if his father hadn't crushed that dream years ago. But love didn't mean I'd tolerate disrespect. Love didn't mean I'd bow to people who thought their bloodline made them superior. And love certainly didn't mean I'd let Gerald Whitmore humiliate me without consequences. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Marcus Webb, my actual boss at Harbor Point, not the HR department the Whitmores had called, who'd been instructed to confirm I was just an analyst. Marcus, who managed a fund worth $2 billion and had taught me everything about turning money into power. It was past 11 p.m., but Marcus never slept. "Elena," he answered on the first ring. "How was dinner with the future in-laws?" "Educational," I replied. "Marcus, remember that development company we were looking at last month, Whitmore Industries? The one hemorrhaging money, sure. Why, I want to buy their debt." Silence. Then Marcus laughed, low and knowing. "All of it. Every penny, through the usual channels, make it untraceable to me. That's going to be about $30 million in various obligations." "You sure?" I thought about Gerald's sneer, Victoria's condescension, the way they'd dismissed me as worthless. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. "Consider it done." "Elena." Marcus paused. "Remind me never to piss you off." I smiled, the real smile this time, sharp as a blade. "Oh, Marcus, you'd never be stupid enough to underestimate me." After hanging up, I sat in the darkness, planning. They wanted to play games with bloodlines and breeding. Fine. I'd show them what happened when new money got tired of old money's condescension. The Whitmores thought they were predators, and I was prey. They were about to learn they'd invited a shark to dinner. Growing up in Dayton, Ohio, I learned that hunger was the best teacher. Not physical hunger, we always had food on the table, but the hunger for something more than suburban mediocrity, more than my parents' resigned acceptance of their place in the world. My father worked at the GM plant for 30 years until they shut it down. My mother taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They were good people who believed in hard work and playing by the rules. They also believed that people like us didn't get to win big. I disagreed. While my classmates were partying through Northwestern, I was in the library studying market patterns. While they were planning spring breaks in Cancun, I was interning at a trading firm in Chicago, sleeping 4 hours a night, learning how money really moved through the world. My first startup was a disaster, an app for sustainable food delivery that burned through my savings and 2 years of my life. I ended up $30,000 in debt, living on ramen, wondering if my parents had been right all along. But failure taught me something success never could: how to read the signs of collapse, how to smell desperation, how to recognize when someone was bluffing with a bad hand. The second venture was different. I'd noticed something during my failed startup: the companies providing our back-end technology were making fortunes while we struggled. So I took my last $1,000 and bought stock in a small cloud computing company nobody had heard of. 6 months later, Amazon bought them. My 1,000 became 40,000. That's when I understood you don't have to build the gold mine. Sometimes you just need to sell the shovels. I moved to Charleston for a fresh start, taking a job at Harbor Point Capital that officially paid $70,000 a year. What the Whitmore's background check didn't uncover was the percentage of profits I earned from the deals I sourced. or the side investments I made with information gathered through completely legal research. Renewable energy was my first big score. While everyone was focused on solar panels, I invested in the companies making the rare earth minerals needed to manufacture them. When electric vehicles took off, my investments in lithium mining exploded. Biotech was next, not the flashy companies promising to cure cancer, but the boring ones making the equipment every lab needed. A company creating more efficient gene sequencers that I bought at $3 a share sold for $90 2 years later. Each win, I rolled into the next investment, living like I was still making that fictional secretary's salary. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. I clipped coupons. I shopped clearance racks. Meanwhile, my money was making money, compound interest working its beautiful mathematics while I slept. The discipline wasn't hard. I'd seen what happened to lottery winners, to athletes who made millions and ended up bankrupt. Money without wisdom was just delayed poverty. So I studied the truly wealthy, not the flashy ones, but the quiet ones. The ones who drove Toyotas and lived in modest houses while owning half the commercial real estate in town. I learned patience from them. I learned that real power wasn't in showing your cards, but in letting everyone think you're not even playing. 10 years. That's how long I gave myself. 10 years to build a fortune that couldn't be taken away, couldn't be lost to one bad decision or market crash. Diversified across industries, countries, currencies, hidden in trusts and LLCs that would take a forensic accountant months to unravel. By year 8, I had 50 million. By year 10, 82 million and counting. That's when I met Nathan at a charity fundraiser for hurricane relief. He was there because the Whitmores needed the tax write-off in the social capital. I was there because I actually cared about the cause and because I'd anonymously donated $2 million and wanted to see how the organization operated. He was different then, away from his family's influence. We talked about sustainable architecture, about buildings that could withstand climate change, about beauty that served purpose. He had dreams before his father crushed them under the weight of obligation. I fell in love with that version of him, the one who stayed up until 3 a.m. sketching designs for affordable housing, the one who got excited about solar panels and rainwater collection systems, the one who didn't know I had money and loved me anyway. For a while, I thought maybe I could have both the man I loved and my carefully guarded independence. I thought maybe the Whitmores would accept me, that love would be enough. Tonight had shown me how naive that was. Standing in my office now, looking at the financial documents spread across my desk, I saw the full picture of what I'd built. Not just money, but power. The kind of power that could destroy the Whitmores' carefully constructed world with a few phone calls. Harbor Point Capital managed pension funds for 3 of the banks holding Whitmore Industries loans. I had personal relationships with board members at 2 of Gerald's major suppliers. One of my shell companies owned the parking structures adjacent to 3 of his development projects. I'd never intended to use any of this. It was just insurance, background knowledge, the kind of preparation that had become second nature. But Gerald had changed that tonight. He'd looked at me and seen nothing worse than nothing, an embarrassment to be endured or discarded. Tomorrow, he'd learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you invite to dinner. I closed the safe, poured another glass of wine, and opened my laptop. I had work to do, not the kind of work Gerald would understand, no yacht club meetings or golf course deals. This was the kind of work that happened in shadows and servers, in boardrooms and bankruptcy courts. The Whitmores had taught me something valuable tonight in their world. Power was inherited. In mine, it was taken. The next morning, Nathan brought coffee and apologies to my apartment. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. "I talked to my father," he said, setting the cups on my kitchen counter. "He's agreed to give you another chance. Mother's planning a ladies' lunch next week at the club. She thinks if you get to know the right people—" "The right people," I interrupted, keeping my voice level. "You know what I mean. Their circle. Once they see you fitting in, Father will come around. Fitting in, like I was a puzzle piece that needed reshaping to match their picture." "Nathan, Do you know why your father's being pressured about the Harrison development deal? He blinked at the subject change. How do you know about that? I read the business section. I lied smoothly. 30 million in cost overruns? Bank's getting nervous. It's just a cash flow issue. Father has it handled. I nodded, sipping my coffee while watching him fidget. My sweet, brilliant Nathan, so blind to his family's reality. He still believed the Whitmore name meant something beyond debt and desperation. That afternoon, I met with my contact at Plymouth Securities, one of the firms holding Whitmore Industries' debt. Sandra Liu owed me a favor from when I'd tipped her off about a merger 2 years ago. The Whitmore papers. She slid a folder across the restaurant table. Interesting reading. They're about 60 days from default on 2 major loans. 60 days, maybe 90 if they can shuffle some assets. But Gerald's been trying to refinance for months. Nobody's biting. She studied me over her salad. Why the interest? Potential investment opportunity, I said carefully. Sandra laughed. Elena, that's not an investment. That's a funeral. Later, I had drinks with James Morrison, a friend from my Northwestern days who now worked at the Charleston City Planning Commission. After 2 martinis, he was happy to gossip about the Whitmores. Gerald's desperate, James confided. He's been pushing for approval on this waterfront project, but the environmental impact studies are a disaster. If it doesn't go through, he's finished. What about Victoria? I asked casually. She seems to have family money. Had family money. Her father lost everything in 2008. She's been keeping up appearances. But my wife's in her garden club. Victoria hasn't paid dues in 6 months. The picture was crystallizing. The Whitmores weren't just struggling, they were drowning, maintaining their facade with smoke and mirrors and credit cards. And their plan to save themselves was to sell their son to the highest bidder. That evening, I discovered something worse. I'd hired a private investigator weeks ago, just basic due diligence on the family I was marrying into. His email was waiting when I got home. Ms. Brooks, concerning your inquiry about G. Whitmore found something you should see. He's been in contact with Patricia Mitchell's father. Emails attached. I read through them, my anger building with each word. Gerald hadn't just insulted me at dinner. He'd been actively working to break up my engagement for months. Promises to Nathan's potential father-in-law about resolving the situation. Discussions about a June wedding to Patricia. References to me as the temporary problem. One email, dated just 3 days ago, made my blood freeze. Don't worry, Richard. My son's infatuation with this, nobody won't last. I have plans to ensure she understands she doesn't belong in our world. After our family dinner Thursday, she'll know exactly where she stands. These types always do, once they realize what they're really up against. Thursday. Last night's dinner. It had been planned, orchestrated. Gerald's humiliation of me wasn't just casual cruelty, it was a calculated move to drive me away. I sat back, processing this. They thought I was so weak, so desperate for approval, that one nasty dinner would send me running. They thought I'd been dating Nathan for his money, and that showing me their superiority would make me give up. The irony was almost funny. I had more money than the Mitchells and Whitmores combined. I could buy Patricia Mitchell's trust fund with what I made in interest in a year. But rage was settling in my chest like ice. Not hot anger that burned out too fast. This was the cold fury that had driven me through those sleepless nights at Northwestern, through the humiliation of my failed startup, through years of being underestimated and overlooked. My phone buzzed. Marcus from Harbor Point. It's done. You now control 60% of Whitmore Industries' debt through various holdings. What's the play? Nothing yet, I said. Just hold. Elena, you know if they default, you could take everything, the company, the assets, even that estate they're so proud of. I know. This is about that dinner, isn't it? What did they do? I thought about Gerald's sneer, Victoria's Ice Queen condescension, the way they'd tried to humiliate me into disappearing. They made a mistake, I said simply. They assumed I was powerless. After hanging up, I made one more call. To Nathan. "Hey," he answered, sounding tired. "I was thinking we could have dinner tomorrow. Somewhere just us, away from all the family drama." "That sounds perfect," I said warmly. "Nathan, I love you. I love you too. And Elena. Don't let my father get to you. He doesn't know the real you." I smiled at the dark window, my reflection showing something predatory. "No," I agreed. "He really doesn't. But he would. Soon. Gerald Whitmore would know exactly who he'd tried to destroy. He'd learn that sometimes the nobody at your dinner table is somebody you can't afford to offend. The game was no longer about winning Nathan or gaining the Whitmores' approval. It was about teaching them that in the 21st century, bloodlines meant nothing compared to bank accounts, and mine was bigger than theirs. 2 weeks later, Gerald threw another party. This time, it was disguised as a charity auction for the Charleston Historical Society, but everyone knew the real purpose networking to save his sinking empire. "You'll need to make a good impression," Nathan had said, almost pleading. "Father's invited the Hamiltons, the Brookshires, even Senator Walsh. This is our chance to show them you belong." Our chance, as if I was the one who needed proving. I dressed carefully for the occasion, a navy dress from my secret wardrobe. Expensive but understated. Just enough to avoid Victoria's sneers, not enough to raise questions. The diamond studs I wore were real, bought with my first $1 million, but small enough to pass for cubic zirconia. The Whitmore estate was transformed into a glittering stage, string quartet in the garden, champagne fountains, silent auction items displayed like museum pieces. Gerald stood at the center, playing the successful patriarch, his laugh booming across the lawn. "Elena," Victoria greeted me with air kisses that didn't touch skin. "How nice you could come. That's a lovely dress." "Ann Taylor." "Just something I had," I replied, not bothering to correct her. She steered me toward a group of women who looked like they'd been pressed from the same country club mold. "Ladies, this is Nathan's little friend, Elena. She works in, what was it again? Dear Secretarial." "Finance," I said simply. "How modern," one of them cooed, the condescension dripping like honey. I smiled and nodded through their discussions of yacht clubs and private schools, filing away every piece of information. Mrs. Hamilton mentioned her husband's construction company was struggling. Mrs. Brookshire let slip that their son had been rejected from Harvard Business School despite a sizable donation. Across the lawn, Gerald was holding court with potential investors, his voice carrying enough for me to hear snippets. "The waterfront project will transform Charleston's skyline. Already have 60% of the funding secured. Just need the right partners with vision." Lies. All lies. I knew from the documents on my desk that he had maybe 20%, and that was being generous. "Excuse me," I murmured to the ladies, making my way toward the house. But instead of heading to the bathroom, I slipped into Gerald's study. His computer was password protected, but the physical files in his desk weren't sloppy. I photographed everything: quickly: contracts, correspondence, desperate emails to banks begging for extensions. Then I saw it. A draft press release, dated for next week. "Whitmore Industries announces partnership with Mitchell Development Families to be united through marriage." They were planning to announce Nathan's engagement to Patricia Mitchell while I was still wearing his ring. "Finding everything you need." I turned. Gerald stood in the doorway, his face flushed from champagne and false confidence. "Just looking for the bathroom," I said calmly, setting down the paper. "In my private study." He closed the door behind him. "You know, Elena, I've been patient. I've tolerated this little charade because Nathan insisted. But we both know you don't belong here. Do we? Don't play games. I know your type. Climbing, grasping, thinking you can seduce your way into society." He moved closer, his cologne overwhelming. "What will it take? 50,000, 100, name your price to disappear?" I almost laughed. He was trying to buy me off with what I made in interest in a week. "You think I'm after Nathan's money?" Aren't you a girl like you? From nowhere. With nothing. What else could you want? I studied him, this man who thought bloodline trumped everything, who was selling his son to save his pride, who was so deep in debt he couldn't see daylight. You're right, I said softly. I am after something. His eyes lit up, thinking he'd won. But it's not Nathan's money I want. Gerald, it's yours. Confusion flickered across his face. Before he could respond, I walked past him, my shoulder barely brushing his arm. Enjoy your party, I said. Oh, and Gerald, you might want to check with Plymouth Securities about that loan extension you're expecting. I heard they're reconsidering. I left him standing there, his face draining of color. He didn't know how I knew. He didn't know who I really was. But the seed of fear was planted. Back at the party, I found Nathan by the auction table. There you are, he said, relief evident. Father hasn't said anything else inappropriate, has he? We just had an enlightening conversation, I said, squeezing his hand. Nathan, if you had to choose between your family and me, what would you do? Don't say that. It won't come to that. But it would. It was already in motion. I watched Gerald emerge from the house, his jovial mask back in place, but his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. I raised my champagne glass slightly, a tiny salute, and saw him flinch. That night, I made 3 phone calls. First, to the environmental lawyer who'd been fighting Gerald's waterfront project. I anonymously sent him documents showing Gerald had falsified impact studies. Second, to a journalist at the Charleston Post who'd been investigating development corruption. I suggested he look into Whitmore Industries' interesting accounting practices. Third, to Marcus. Monday morning, I want you to call in 10% of the Whitmore debt, just enough to scare them. That'll trigger covenant violations on their other loans. I'm counting on it. I stood on my balcony, looking out at the Charleston lights, planning my next moves like chess pieces. Gerald thought he was the king, protected by privilege and tradition. He was about to learn that in chess, the queen was the most powerful piece on the board, and I was done playing nice. The family meeting was called for Sunday afternoon. Nathan picked me up, his hands trembling slightly as he drove. Father's been acting strange all week, he said. Something about the business. He wants everyone there, even Margaret's flying in from New York. I knew why. The Monday loan call had started a domino effect. Banks were circling like vultures. The environmental lawsuit had frozen the waterfront project. The journalist had started asking uncomfortable questions. Gerald was desperate, and desperate men do desperate things. The entire Whitmore clan had gathered in the formal living room. Margaret, Nathan's sister, sat with her hedge fund husband, both looking annoyed at being summoned. Victoria perched on her chair like a queen on a throne, though I noticed her jewelry was different paste, not diamonds. The good pieces had probably been quietly sold. Gerald stood by the fireplace, his face haggard despite the attempted commanding presence. We need to discuss the future of this family, he began. The business is facing temporary challenges. Nothing we can't handle, but it requires unity. Sacrifice. His eyes found me. And it requires making smart decisions about who belongs in this family. Dad, Nathan started. Nathan, the Mitchell family has graciously renewed their offer. Patricia's father is willing to invest $40 million in our waterfront project. It would solve everything. I'm engaged to Elena. Engagements can be broken. Gerald's voice was ice, especially when they're based on deception. He pulled out a folder my heart skipped, wondering what he'd found. But it wasn't about my money. It was worse. Your fiancé, he spat the word, has been investigating us, hiring private detectives, accessing confidential information. She even broke into my study during the charity auction. All eyes turned to me. Nathan's face was shocked, hurt. Elena, is this true? I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt. The private investigator. Yes, I hired one. Why? Nathan's voice cracked. Because your father has been trying to destroy our relationship since day one. because he's been negotiating your marriage to Patricia Mitchell behind your back. Because I needed to know what I was really walking into. How dare you? Victoria started. How dare I? I laughed, the sound sharp in the elegant room. You've treated me like dirt since we met. You've insulted my background, my education, my family. You tried to humiliate me into leaving, and you want to talk about deception. I opened my own bag, pulling out the printed emails between Gerald and Richard Mitchell. Should we discuss real deception like promising your son to another woman while he's engaged to me? I tossed the papers on the coffee table. Nathan grabbed them, his face paling as he read. Dad, you were planning my wedding to Patricia. It's business, son, our family's survival. No. I interrupted, standing now, finally ready to drop the mask. It's about your ego, your refusal to admit you've failed. You've leveraged everything the company, this house, your reputation on projects that were doomed from the start. You know nothing about business, you little, I know you're 60 days from bankruptcy. I said calmly. I know Plymouth Securities called in 10% of your loan because they lost confidence. I know the waterfront project is dead because you falsified environmental studies. I know Victoria sold her grandmother's necklace last month to pay for the country club membership. The room went silent. Victoria's hand went unconsciously to her throat. How could you possibly? Gerald's face was purple. Because I own your debt, Gerald. The words hung in the air like a bomb detonation. What? Nathan's voice was barely a whisper. I pulled out my phone, showing them the holding statement on the screen. Through various investment vehicles, I control 60% of Whitmore Industries' outstanding debt. As of Monday, I effectively own your company. That's impossible, Gerald sputtered. You're nobody, a secretary. You don't have that kind of money. $82 million, I said quietly. That's what I'm worth. Well, 85 as of yesterday. The market's been good. Margaret laughed, hysterical. This is insane. You're lying. I pulled out more documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, the deed to 3 buildings downtown they passed every day. The woman you called a gold digger has more money than your entire family combined. The nobody you tried to humiliate could buy and sell you 3 times over. The secretary you sneered at is about to decide whether your family keeps this house or ends up on the street. Nathan was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Elena, why didn't you tell me? Would your family have treated me differently if they knew I was rich? I asked. Of course. They would have rolled out the red carpet. But I needed to see who you really were. All of you. I looked at each of them in turn. Margaret, who asked me at our first meeting if I knew which fork to use. Victoria, who suggested I should be grateful. Nathan even looked at me. And Gerald, who told me I should be thankful for whatever crumbs I was offered. Finally, I looked at Nathan. And you, who sat there and let it happen, who never once stood up for me until it was too late. Elena, please. He reached for me. I stepped back. The loans are due in full in 30 days. I could extend them, restructure them, even forgive them. But why would I do that for people who treated me like I was worthless? You planned this. Gerald accused. You targeted Nathan. I fell in love with Nathan. I corrected. The planning only started after you tried to destroy me. You made this personal. Gerald. You turned love into war. I picked up my purse, headed for the door. Wait, Nathan called. Elena, we can fix this. We can work it out. I turned back, looking at the family frozen in their elegant room, their entire world crumbling. You want to fix this. Here are my terms. Gerald publicly apologizes for his treatment of me. Victoria does the same. The engagement to Patricia Mitchell is formally declined. And Nathan. I looked at the man I'd loved. Nathan decides whether he wants to marry me for who I am, not what I have. This is extortion, Gerald spat. No, I said quietly. It's business. Something you should understand. You have 48 hours to decide. I walked out, leaving them in their shattered kingdom. finally understanding that the nobody they'd dismissed had been somebody all along, somebody with the power to destroy them. The 48 hours passed in silence. No calls from Nathan, no lawyers from Gerald, nothing. Then, on Tuesday morning, Marcus called. "They're trying to find another buyer for the debt," he informed me. "Gerald's been on the phone with every bank from here to New York. He's also hired Brennan and Associates. Brennan and Associates, the best corporate law firm in the Southeast. So Gerald wanted to fight. Let him try," I said. "The contracts are ironclad." "Elena, there's something else. Nathan's been asking around about you. He called here directly. Wanted to know if you really were who you said you were. And I told him the truth, that you're the best investment mind I've ever worked with, that you could have retired 5 years ago, but you love the game too much, that you've been hiding your wealth since long before you met him." That afternoon, my doorbell rang. Nathan stood there, looking exhausted, holding a box. "Your things," he said quietly, "from my apartment." I took the box, noting the engagement ring wasn't inside. "You could have mailed them." "I needed to see you, to understand." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. 82 million, Elena. And you let us let him treat you like that. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. But you lied. Did I? I told you I worked in finance. I told you I was from Ohio. I told you about my parents, my education, my interests. The only thing I didn't mention was the number in my bank account. That's a pretty big omission. Like your father planning to marry you off to Patricia Mitchell. He flinched. I didn't know about that. But you knew he didn't approve of me. You knew he was working against us. And you did nothing. He's my father. And I was going to be your wife. We stood there, the gulf between us wider than ever. Finally, Nathan spoke. He's going to fight you. He's convinced you obtained the debt illegally, that there's some loophole. There isn't. Elena, please, just extend the loans. Give him time to figure things out. Not for him, for me. For what we had. What we had. I laughed bitterly. What we had was me being humiliated while you stayed silent. What we had was your mother suggesting I should be grateful for your attention. What we had was your father trying to buy me off like a prostitute. I'll leave them, Nathan said suddenly. Cut ties. We'll start fresh. Just us. With what your trust fund that's tied to the company, your job at your father's firm, you've never been independent. Nathan, you don't even know who you are without them. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went white. What is it? He showed me the screen. A news alert. Whitmore Industries under investigation for financial fraud. I hadn't leaked that. But when blood's in the water, sharks circle from every direction. You did this? He accused. Your father did this when he built his empire on lies and debt. I just stopped enabling it. My phone rang. Gerald's number. Yes, you win. His voice was broken, aged 20 years in 2 days. I'll apologize. Publicly. Victoria, too. Just extend the loans. Please. And Nathan's engagement to Patricia. Already called off. Richard Mitchell won't return my calls anyway, not after the news broke. I'll have my lawyers draft the extension papers. 5-year terms, market rate interest, personal guarantees from you and Victoria. Personal guarantees that could take our house if— Yes, I said simply. It could? Silence. Then, fine. I hung up and looked at Nathan. Your father just agreed to my terms. So you'll save them. I'll give them time. Whether they save themselves is up to them. Nathan stepped closer. And us, is there any chance for us? I thought about the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who dreamed of sustainable architecture and better worlds. That man had been real, but he'd also been weak, shaped by privilege and family pressure into someone who couldn't stand up when it mattered. No, I said quietly. There's no us anymore. Because I didn't defend you. Because when push came to shove, you showed me who you really are, and that person isn't someone I can trust with my heart or my fortune. He left without another word, taking with him the last piece of Elena Brooks who had believed in fairy tales. That evening, I stood in my office, looking at the contracts my lawyers had sent over. With a signature, I could destroy the Whitmores or save them. The power was intoxicating and terrible. I thought about my parents back in Ohio, who'd taught me that hard work and kindness would be enough. They were wrong about the first part. Sometimes hard work just made you tired. But maybe they were right about the second. I signed the extension papers, not out of kindness to the Whitmores, but because destroying them completely wouldn't change what had happened. They'd learned their lesson. Gerald would never again assume someone was worthless based on appearances. Victoria would think twice before condescending to someone she deemed beneath her, and Nathan would have to live with knowing he'd lost someone who loved him truly, all because he couldn't stand up to Daddy. Marcus called as I was pouring wine. The papers went through. The Whitmores have their extension. You know you could have made $30 million if you'd foreclosed. I know. So why didn't you? I looked out at Charleston's lights, this city of old money and older prejudices, where I'd learned that power wasn't about what you could destroy, but what you chose to preserve. Because I'm not them, I said simply. I don't need to destroy people to prove my worth. You're a better person than I am. No, I corrected. I'm just richer. Rich enough to afford mercy. The public apology came 2 weeks later, orchestrated at the Charleston Business Alliance monthly luncheon. Gerald had insisted on this venue, probably hoping to salvage some dignity by controlling the narrative among his peers. I sat at a corner table, having arrived early to watch the room fill with Charleston's elite. They whispered behind manicured hands, the story having spread through their circles like wildfire. The mighty Gerald Whitmore, brought to his knees by his son's ex-fiancée. Gerald took the podium at 12:30 p.m., his hands gripping the edges like a life raft. The room fell silent. Before we begin today's program, he started, his voice missing its usual boom, I need to address something personal that has become unfortunately public. He found me in the crowd, our eyes meeting across the room. I owe an apology to Ms. Elena Brooks in my misguided attempts to protect what I thought were my family's interests. I behaved abhorrently. I judged her based on assumptions rather than character. I was wrong. The words were stiff, forced, but they were said, publicly, on record. Victoria stood next, her designer suit unable to hide how diminished she looked. I, too, apologized to Ms. Brooks for my behavior. It was inexcusable. She sat down quickly, her face burning with humiliation. I stood, letting the room's attention shift to me. Thank you, I said simply, my voice carrying clearly. I accept your apologies. Then I walked out, my heels clicking against marble, leaving them to their whispers and speculation. Nathan was waiting by my car. That was generous of you, he said, not making them grovel more. I don't need them to grovel. I needed them to acknowledge what they did. There's a difference. Elena, I've been thinking. Don't. I unlocked my car. We're done. Nathan, your family has their extension. The company will survive if your father learns humility and actual business sense. You're free to chase your architecture dreams or remain under his thumb, but none of that involves me anymore. You loved me once. I did. But love without respect is just possession, and your family taught me I deserve better than that. 6 months later, I was at a gallery opening in downtown Charleston when I heard a familiar voice. Elena. Nathan stood there, looking different, healthier. The stress lines that had been appearing around his eyes were gone. Nathan, I wanted to thank you, he said, for the extension, for not destroying us when you could have. How's the family business? Surviving. Barely. Father had to sell the yacht and the country club membership. Mother's actually working now. She got a job at an interior design firm. He laughed, but it wasn't bitter. They're almost normal people. And you? I left. Started my own firm. Sustainable architecture, like I always wanted. It's small, but it's mine. Good for you. He hesitated. I heard you're dating someone. That tech entrepreneur from Seattle. David, I confirmed. He builds schools in developing countries. We met at a charity auction. Does he know about your money? From day one. He has his own fortune. We can be equals. Nathan nodded slowly. I really screwed up, didn't I? You were who you were raised to be. Maybe now you can be who you choose to be. We parted without drama, without lingering looks or what-ifs. Just two people who had learned hard lessons moving in different directions. A year after that dinner where everything changed, I received a handwritten letter, no return address, but I recognized Victoria's handwriting. Ms. Brooks, I doubt you'll read this, but I need to write it. The humiliation of apologizing publicly was nothing compared to the humiliation of realizing what we'd become. We were so concerned with bloodlines and legacy that we forgot basic human decency. Gerald is a different man now, humbled. He actually works instead of just networking. We've downsized everything the estate is on the market. We're moving to a normal house in Mount Pleasant. Nathan is thriving away from us, which perhaps says everything that needs to be said about our influence. You could have destroyed us. Most would have. Your mercy, even if it wasn't for our sakes, taught me more about class than all my years of cotillion and country clubs. I hope you found happiness. Victoria Whitmore. I kept the letter, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's forcing people to see themselves clearly. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Dinner at 7:30 p.m. Found a new place that doesn't require reservations or a trust fund. I smiled, texting back, perfect. My kind of restaurant. I looked around my apartment, still modest, still understated. I'd thought about buying something grand after everything came out, but realized I didn't need external validation anymore. The Whitmores had tried to humble me because they thought I was nobody. They learned too late that I was somebody who didn't need their approval, their acceptance, or their world. I had my own. Standing at my window, looking out at Charleston Harbor, I raised my wine glass to my reflection. The woman looking back wasn't the eager-to-please Elena who'd walked into that dinner a year ago. She was someone harder, sharper, but also freer. To knowing your worth, I said quietly, and never letting anyone convince you it's less than it is. The sun set over the water, painting the sky in shades of gold, the color of new beginnings, of possibilities, of a life lived on my own terms. Gerald Whitmore had humiliated me at dinner. He didn't know I had $82 million. But more importantly, he didn't know I had something worth even more the strength to walk away from people who didn't deserve me, and the wisdom to know that real power isn't about what you can destroy, it's about what you choose to build after the destruction is done. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Elena's position? Your perspectives and experiences make this community special. Until next time, remember, know your worth and never let anyone diminish it.